ለመማር ወደ ትምህርት ተቋም መሄድ ግድ አይደለም።
ናሽናል አቪዬሽን ኮሌጅ
ራሳችሁን ከኮሮና ቫይረስ ወረርሽኝ እየጠበቃችሁ በቤታችሁ ወይም በተመቻችሁ ቦታ
በኢንተርኔት አማካኝነት በኦንላይን ትምህርታችሁን መከታተል ይቻላል።
ካናዳ ከሚገኘው ኢንተርናሽናል ኤር ትራንስፖርት አሶሲዬሽን አያታና
ከእንግሊዙ ኢንስቲትዩት ኦፍ ኮመርሻል ማኔጅመንት ICM ጋር በመተባበር የሚሰጡ ትምህርቶችን ተከታትላችሁ በ6 ወር ጊዜ በዓለም አቀፍ ደረጃ ተቀባይነት ያለውን የስልጠና ማስረጃ ባለቤት መሆን ይቻላል።
ከኢትዮጵያ ሲቪል አቪዬሽን ባለስልጣን ሙሉ ዕውቅና ባገኘንባቸው የፍላይት ኦፕሬሽን እና የሆስተስ ስልጠናም በምዝገባ ላይ ነን።
ጥያቄና መልስ፣ የክፍል ስራዎች ብሎም ፈተና መፈተን ክፍል ውስጥ እንዳላችሁ አይነት
ልምድ ባላቸው መምህራን እየተማራችሁ
በኦንላይን ባላችሁበት ቦታ
አድራሻ ከ22 ማዞሪያ ወደ ሾላ ገበያ በሚወስደው መንገድ 150 ሜትር ገባ ብሎ ናሽናል አቪዬሽን ኮሌጅ
የናሽናል ኤርዌይስ እህት ኩባንያ
ህልሞን እውን ያደርጋል።
Good afternoon, dear students. Happy New Year for all of you. This is the first class in this new year. Today, we are going to see the first part of Chapter 5. Chapter 5 is inflation. I hope the sound is okay. If there is any problem. Okay, this is chapter 5, inflation. At the end of this chapter, you are expected to understand very fundamental questions. The first is, it starts by the understanding of the term inflation. And for what does inflation mean? You have to know this. And what are the causes of inflation? What are the causes of inflation? And how can we measure inflation? What is the means of measuring inflation? And what are the policy remedies for controlling inflation? After this, we will see the case of Ethiopia. What are the basket of goods and services that are considered for measuring inflation in Ethiopia? We will see this as well. Let's first define inflation. I hope you all are familiar with the term inflation, but for those of you who are far from economics, this definition is important for you. Inflation is defined as a persistent increase in general price level of goods and services. In this definition, there are 3 important terminologies. One is persistent, meaning it is not considering for a snapshot. It looks into a long period of time. That's why we are referring persistent. The other important point is we are going to consider the general price level. General price level of those goods and services. There are different goods and services in the economy. Therefore, when we are referring inflation, we are talking about the general, the average price level of goods and services. Therefore, we will consider a number of goods and services in the economy. And the consideration of these goods and services might differ from country to country. We will see the specific items or the specific goods and services that the Central Statistical Agency considers. You can also visit the CSTA website. The other dimension of defining inflation is a decline in the purchasing power of the currency. Inflation reduces the purchasing power of the currency. This is to mean that, for instance, if you have 100 birr in your pocket at a specific base year, you might be able to say purchase one shoe. However, after a period of time, the price of that shoe might be increased, and you may not be capacitated to purchase that specific shoe unless you add more amount of money in your pocket. Generally, inflation can result in the decline of the purchasing power of the money. The other schools of thought also defines inflation as the expansion of money and credit, which results in the rising of prices. Commonly, this definition belongs to the quantity theory of money. Therefore, inflation is the persistent increase in the average price of goods and services. Now let's see the cause of inflation. What are the causes of inflation? In different texts, you might find different explanation, but we can aggregate the causes of inflation into three for this discussion. One is the demand pull, the second is cost push, and the other is the expansion of the money supply. These are considered to be the cause of inflation. Let's see here how the demand pull can result in inflation, how the cost push can result in inflation, as well as how the money supply is linked with that of the inflation. Demand pull. When does demand pull inflation occur? Demand pull inflation will occur when the demand for the goods and services increases so much that outstrips supply. Meaning here, though we are referring to demand pull inflation makes a comparison between demand and supply of goods and services. Here, demand pull inflation will occur when the demand outstrips that of the goods and services supplied. Here, when there is an increment in demand, what will be the response of those sellers? You know that sellers are from the supply side. when there is an increment in demand, if there is no parallel increment in the supply of goods and services, there will be a competition on the existing goods and services. And that competition between the demanders will push the price up. And this happens because of the rigidity of the supply, meaning the supply might not consistently increase with the increase in demand. However, there is a possibility of being attracted by the increase in price from the supplier side. Then they will try to increase their production. Then it will be stabilized. However, as I said to you, here inflation will happen if still the demand outstrips the supply. And this is because at the end of the day, the supply fails to deliver the products as per the increment in demand. Therefore, from demand pull, inflation happens when the demand outstrips that of the supply, and when the supply fails to respond or consistently increased for the increased in demand of goods and services. Demand pool can also consist of the black money, the wage component, the disposable income, considering the net income after taxation, and the non-productive expenditure and population increment. Non-productive expenditure, meaning the expenditure is not made for the production, which is still putting a pressure on this demand side. Population increment, you see, the population increment might not be a problem by itself. The problem is when the supply fails to increase for the increased population, meaning you have population increment in one side, and that population demands goods and services. On the other side, there are producers or suppliers. Therefore, if those suppliers fail to increase their supply for the proportional increment of the population, then inflation might happen. Wages can create inflation both from the supply and or from the demand side. For instance, if you are paid high, as you know, if you are paid high, then your demand will parallelly increase, right? This is from the demand side. And on the other way, the rising in wage can also increase the input cost of the producers, because labor is one component of input for suppliers. As a result, rising wages might result in pushing the prices up, as firms have to pay higher wages. And parallelly, for paying that higher wage, they have to increase the price of the goods and services that they are supplying. Therefore, we can see the wage from the demand and from the supply side. You can see from this picture, if you are paid high wage, then you see this guy from a supermarket has taken large volume of goods from the supermarket. You see how the cart is full, right? However, if you are paid less money might result in less wants. Therefore, you see this cart only consists of very important items for livelihood. However, this guy has a very loaded demand. Therefore, this person has taken large volume from the supermarket. And if all other people are having large wages, the same happens with this guy. Therefore, these persons are competing for the limited resource or items that are supplied in the restaurant here or in the supermarket. Therefore, wages have an implication on the inflation. The other is the input cost, a cost push. As the prices of inputs increases, the price of the commodities will increase as well. Therefore, the increment in the price of inputs can result in inflation. For instance, the case in point in America in 2005 to 2008 is there was a very accelerated price increment in the oil, and the oil price has a multiplier effect on different sectors. Therefore, as the price of inputs or raw materials increases, the price of the commodities or the price of the product will consequently increase, and that increment can be referred as inflation if it is consistent enough. The other cause of inflation is the money supply. If there is an expansion in money supply, it may result in the price increment. And the quantity theory of money is one of the earliest ways that establishes the relationship between money supply and that of the inflation. And this theory centrally argued that The general level of prices change is mainly sourced from changes in the quantity of money, which is circulating at the hand of the public. ኢኮኖሚ ሰርኩሌት እያደረገ ያለው በግለሰቦች ሰርኩሌት እያደረገ ያለው ገንዘብ በጣም ከፍተኛ ከሆነ የሸቀጦች ዋጋ ሊጨምር ይችላል። and this is referred as the quantity theory of money. Therefore, this theory argued that inflation can happen as a result of the implementation of the expansionary monetary supply in the economy. Because the money supply will be distributed in the form of credit, loans, or mortgages. And when loans are cheap, meaning when the interest rate that people are paying for loans is very small, then people will borrow much. As a result, when there is large volume of money in the hand of people, there will be a competition on the limited goods. Therefore, that is why we are saying that when loans are cheap, this refers that too much money will be in the hand of the public, and this too much money will be used for chasing too few goods. የወለድ ዝቅተኛ ከሆነ የብድር ወለድ ዝቅተኛ ከሆነ ኮስቱ ዝቅተኛ ነው ማለት ነው። ስለዚህ ሰዎች በቀላሉ እጃቸው ላይ ገንዘብ እንዲገባ ይሆናል ማለት ነው። ስለዚህ ሰዎች እጅ ላይ ደግሞ በጣም ገንዘብ በበዛ ቁጥር በፓራራሊ ፕሮዳክሽን ወይም ሳፕላይ ካልጨመረ ባሉት ሊሚትድ ሪሶርስ ላይ ኮምፒቲሽን ነው የሚሆነው። as a result inflation happen ያደርጋል ማለት ነው። Okay, well, if you understand the causes of inflation, then what are the policy instruments for controlling inflation? What are the techniques or the policy interventions that can result in controlling the undesired inflation? There are different proponents on the way how to control inflation. For instance, let's consider the monetarists and the structuralists. The monetarists argue that inflation is purely monetary phenomenon. As a result, the only possible one for controlling is to curb the excess demand. Meaning excess demand is resulting in inflation. And the possible way of controlling this excess demand is through the application of both monetary and physical policies. I hope you know what monetary and physical policies are from your macroeconomics, right? Therefore, from the monetarist view, there is a need to integrate the monetary and physical policies. However, those post-Keynesians structuralist perspective have the other arguments. They still argue the importance of monetary and fiscal policies. However, these monetary and fiscal policies alone can't address the problem of inflation. In addition, there could be other interventions, and these interventions could be made for the structural rigidities. Because the structuralists believe that inflation is arising because of the structural maladjustments or bottlenecks or rigidities in the economic system in general. They propose to tackle these rigidities. These rigidities, for instance, can be expressed in terms of the unemployment, the stagnant economy, for instance, in developing nations. Therefore, monetary and fiscal policies alone cannot result in effective control of inflation. Rather, there could be the integration with the structural problem addressing. ሞኔታሪስቶች የሚያምኑት ሶርሱ ኤክሰስ ዲማንድ ነው ብለው የሚያምኑት። ስለዚህ ሞኔታሪ እና ፊዚካል ፖሊሲ ሞኔታሪ ፖሊሲ ይሄ ከኢንተረስት ሬት አንፃር ከመኒ ሳፕላይ ነው። ፊዚካል ፖሊሲ ደግሞ ይሄ ታክሴሽን፣ ገቨርንመንት ኤክስፔንዲቸር እነሱን ኮንሲደር ያደርጋል። ስለዚህ ኢንፍሌሽን ኮንሲደር ለማድረግ ኤክሰስ ዲማንድ ነው ኢንፍሌሽን ክሬት የሚያደርገው። ስለዚህ በሞኔታሪ እና ፊዚካል ፖሊሲስ ኮምባይን አድርገን ኤክሰስ ዲማንዱን ኮንትሮል ማድረግ ደን ኢንፍሌሽኑን ኮንትሮል ማድረግ ያስችለናል ነው የሚለው ሞኔታሪስት አርጊመንት። በሌላ በኩል ደግሞ ስትራክቸራሊስት አርጊመንት ይባላል። ስትራክቸራሊስት አርጊመንት ሞኔታሪ ኤንድ ፊስካል ፖሊሲስ ብቻቸውን ችግሩን ሊፈቱ አይችሉም። ምክንያቱም የኢንፍሌሽን ምክንያት ወይ መነሻው ስትራክቸራል ሪጂዲቲስ ይሄ ኢኮኖሚ ጤናኛ አለመሆን፣ ቦትልኔክስ፣ ሪጂዲቲስ፣ ማላጅስትመንቶች ናቸው። ስለዚህ መጀመሪያ እነዚህ ነገሮችም በጣምራ አድሬስ ማድረግ ይኖርብናል። አዘርዋይስ ይሄ የኢንተረስት ሬት፣ የመኒ ሳፕላይ፣ የታክሴሽን፣ የገቨርንመንት በጀት እነዚህ ነገሮች ብቻቸውን ኢንፍሌሽንን ኮንትሮል ማድረግ አይችሉም ነው። Therefore, we need to consider the maladjustments and bottlenecks. That is the argument of the post-Keynesian structuralist perspective. The other one is, በጣም ኪ የሆነ አርጊመንታቸው ምንድነው? በተለይም የታዳጊ ሀገሮች የኢኮኖሚ ስርዓታቸው፣ የማህበራዊ ስርዓታቸው፣ የፊዚካል፣ የካልቸር፣ የሶሻል ሴቲንግ አጠቃላይ ልዩነት አለው። ስለዚህ ስፔሲፊክ ፖሊሲ ለታዳጊ ሀገሮች ይሄ ነው ተብሎ ሊቀመጥ አይችልም። There will not be a single and specific model which can address inflation for developing nations. Therefore, their argument is it has to be contextual. Given those arguments, now let's see some of the common policy measures for controlling inflation. One is the fiscal policy. The fiscal policy, it suggests for reducing the budget deficit. Meaning sometimes the government might run the economy with deficit, and this deficit is usually financed from, for instance, borrowing, right? Therefore, when the government borrows, it is introducing or injecting money into the economy. Therefore, one of the physical policy measure is government could reduce the budget deficit. The budget deficit is the difference between the amount it collects and the expenditure that the government does. And there are various techniques for reducing that. And tax as well has an implication. The second point is monetary policy. In monetary policy, one suggestion is excusing of credit. How can we excuse credit? One is by affecting the cost of the credit itself. The cost of credit is referring for interest, right? Interest. ስለዚህ ለምሳሌ በብድር መልኩ ወደ ኢኮኖሚው በጣም ብዙ ገንዘብ እየገባ ከሆነ then የብድርን ዋጋ, that is interest, ከፍ ማድረግ ሊሆን ይችላል, for instance. Therefore, this can influence the amount of credit that will be available for private business firms. This is a simple example. You can consider a number of policy alternatives under the physical and that of under the monetary policy. Okay. The other is if the source of the inflation is thought to be excess demand relative to the aggregate supply, then it is possible to address this excess demand through imports. But still, the policy measures have interlinkage. For instance, this might have an implication on the import and export balance of the balance of the economy. However, still you can consider importation as a means of filling the gap. ኢኮኖሚ ውስጥ በጣም ከፍተኛ ዲማንድ ኖሮ ሳፕላዩ በጣም አነስተኛ ከሆነ ኢምፖርት ማድረግም ተመራጭ ባይሆንም አንድ መፍትሄ ነው. But this importation would have to look into the comparative advantage of the economy. The other is income policy. Freezing wage. The wage that are paid for how those employees could be made with reference to the productivity. If there is no increment in productivity, wage increment by itself might result in inflation. ስለዚህ አሁን የደሞዝ ጭማሪ ዝም ብሎ እንዲሁ መጨመር የዋጋ ንረትን ያስከትላል. ግን ለምሳሌ ሰዎች በሚያመርቱት መጠን ወይም የምርታማነታቸው ሲጨምር parallel wage increase ብታደርግ it is rational. because በዚህ በኩል በዲማንድ በኩል wage ጨምሯል፣ በሳፕላዩ በኩል ደግሞ ምርት ጨምሯል። ስለዚህ አብረው መሄድ ይችላል። ግን አንዳንዴ ምርት ሳይጨምር ዝም ብሎ ደሞዝ መጨመር ባለችው ምርት ላይ ሰዎች ብዙ ገንዘብ ሲያገኙ ባለችው ምርት ላይ እንዲወዳደሩና ዋጋ እንዲንር ያደርጋል ስለዚህ freezing wages this is to mean that the wage increment would have to be with reference to the productivity of those workers therefore there is a need to avoid the increment in wage which is not related to the improvement in the productivity of that employee. And the other important remedy for controlling inflation is increasing the aggregate supply. The question is how? How we can increase the aggregate supply? ስለዚህ ኢኮኖሚ ውስጥ ያለውን ምርት መጨመር ማለት ነው ምርቱ ሲጨመር ዋጋ ይቀንሳል from the principle of economics ceteris paribus ስለዚህ ምርት aggregate supply እንዴት ነው የምንጨምረው ነው one is through full utilization of the productive capacity there might be idle resources in the economy therefore it is possible to increase the production ለምሳሌ a simple example ዝም ብሎ ማይታረስ ማሳ ሊኖር ይችላል ስለዚህ አንዱ means ያ አይድል የሆነ ማይታረስ ማሳን ወደ ስራ ማስገባት ሊሆን ይችላል ማይሰሩ ወጣቶች ወይም ስራዓት ወጣቶች አይድል የሆነ ብዙ ሪሶርስ ሊኖር ይችላል then እሱን ወደ ምርት ማስገባት ነው therefore there are a number of mechanisms for boosting aggregate supply and one of the key component of the increasing aggregate supply is utilization of the productive capacity of the economy or the industries in general. I hope you have some idea on the controlling mechanisms of inflation. Now, let's see the measures of inflation. Inflation እንዴት ነው የምናውቀው ነው በምንድን ነው የምንለካው ነው commonly the principal measure of inflation is the consumer price index I hope ይህንን more ነገር በጥልቀት እናየዋለን the formula in general for calculating the consumer price index is the cost of basket of goods divided by the cost of the basket of goods at the base year. For instance, if you are calculating the inflation, the annual inflation, for instance, you may use some specific year as a reference year. For instance, for calculating the consumer price index for the cost of basket of goods from 2018 TR at time initial and you could use 2019 as the current year and you can convert into percentage. Therefore, this is the measure of inflation. We call it the principal means of measuring inflation, CPI. Now I will give you a discussion for 7 to 8 minutes. Then I will come up with the summary of your discussion that gives you specific case studies in Ethiopia. Therefore, you will have a group discussion for 7 to 8 minutes. There are 16 students. I will divide you into 5. And the question is, ካላችሁ ልምድ የተነሳ cause of inflation ለምሳሌ more of ለጥራጥሬ እህሎች ምንድነው በኢትዮጵያ ኬስ? What is your observation? What is your experience? What about milk, meat, etc.? ይህንን ዲስከስ ታደርጋላችሁ። then research actual የሆነ የተሰራ ሪሰርች በኤግዛምፕል እናየዋለን።
በትምህርት ከፍ ብሎ መብረር ይቻላል። ናሽናል አቪዬሽን ኮሌጅ የናሽናል ኤርዌይስ እህት ኩባንያ ከከፍተኛ ትምህርት አግባብነትና ጥራት ኤጀንሲ ሙሉ ዕውቅናን ባገኘንባቸው በማስተርስ ዲግሪ MBA በስትራቴጂክ ማኔጅመንት፣ MBA በባንኪንግ እና ፋይናንስ፣ MBA በቢዝነስ ሊደርሺፕ፣ MBA በሪስክና ኢንሹራንስ፣ MSc በኢንተርናሽናል ትሬድ እና ኢኮኖሚክስ ዘርፎች በእውቀት ለመቅረጽ የበቁ ፕሮፌሰሮቻችን አረንጓዴ መብራታቸውን አብርተዋል። በነገራችን ላይ በኬንያ ሀገር ከሚገኙ ስመጥር ዩኒቨርሲቲዎች በሚመጡ ፕሮፌሰሮች የትኩረት መስክ ትምህርቶቹ መሰጠታቸው ልዩ ያደርገናል። በምርጥ የትምህርት ስርዓት የተገነባው ናሽናል አቪዬሽን ኮሌጅ በመጀመሪያ ዲግሪ በአቪዬሽን ማኔጅመንት፣ በሆቴል ማኔጅመንት፣ በአካውንቲንግ እና ፋይናንስ፣ በማርኬቲንግ ማኔጅመንት አስተማማኝ ትምህርት ይገቢውና ራስዎንና ሀገሮን ይለውጡ። አድራሻ 22 አደባባይ ወደ ሾላ በሚወስደው መንገድ ላይ ናሽናል አቪዬሽን ኮሌጅ የናሽናል ኤርዌይስ እህት ኩባንያ ህልሞን እውን ያደርጋል።
Okay, dear all, thank you for your hot discussion. And we are back to the main hall now. And I will give you a chance to report and share your experience for the rest of the group members, other than your group member. Please raise your hand and I will give you a chance to unmute your phone, okay? Group 1. Group 1. Okay, dress. You can unmute and you can summarize within someone.
እና ጤፍን አሁን ያየነው ዲማንድ ፑል ኢንፍሌሽን ላይ እናካተዋለን። ምክንያቱም ፖፑሌሽን ኢንክሪዝ እያደረገ ነው በሀገራችን ደረጃ። ይሄ ፖፑሌሽን ደግሞ ከጤፍ ምርት ጋር ወይ ደግሞ ጤፍ ወደ ገበያ የሚገባ የጤፍ አማውንት ኦፍ ጤፍ ከፖፑሌሽኑ ጋር ኢኩቫላንት አይደለም። ስለዚህ ዲማንድ ፖፑሌሽኑ በጣም ኢንክሪዝ እያደረገ በሄደ ቁጥር እንደ ሀገራችን የጤፍ ኮንሱም የሚያደርገው ያነሰ ሳፕላይ ይቀንሳል ማለት ነው። በዚህ ምክንያት የጤፍ ዋጋ አመት አመት ይጨምራል፣ እየጨመረ ነው የሚሄደው ማለት ነው። በተለይ ሚልክ ማው ያው እንደ ሀገራችን ዘመናዊ የሆነ የወተት እርባታ የለም። አብዛኛውን በባህላዊ የአረባብ ዘዴ ነው የሚለውት። አሁን ይሄን ያህል ሚልክ ፕሮዳክት ይሄኛው ዲማንድ ፑል ኢንፍሌሽን ላይ ይመጣል ማለት ነው። ዲማንዱ በጣም ኢንክሪዝ እያደረገ ነው ወተት የመጠቀም እንትናችን የፖፑሌሽን ወተት የመጠቀም ፍላጎቱ ይጨምራል። ይሄኛው የወተት ምርት ደግሞ ይሄንን ዲማንድ ከበር ማድረግ አይችልም። ያ ማለት ፕሮዳክቲቪቲ ለስ ነው ማለት ነው። ስለዚህ ሁለቶችን ነገር እናደርግና ዲማንድ ፑል ላይ ሞር ይላል ማለት ነው። አሁን ወደ ፊዚካል ፖሊሲ ስንመጣ ፊዚካል ፖሊሲ ለሀገራችን ያየነው ፊዚካል ፖሊሲ ላይ አብዛኛው መንግስት በጀቶች ኤክስፔንዲቸሮች ወደ ማርኬቱ ይረጫሉ ለተለያዩ ፕሮጀክት ማስፈጸሚያዎች። እና በተለያየ ወጣት ማደራጃ ኢንተርፕራይዞች እነዚህ ኢንተርፕራይዞች ወይም ፕሮጀክቶች በተፈለገው ጊዜ አልቀው ወይ ደግሞ ተፈጻሚ ሆና ፕሮዳክቲቪቲውን መጨመር አቅታቸዋል ማለት ነው። እንደኛ ኬስ ስናየው አብዛኛውን ፕሮጀክቶች አልቀው ፕሮዳክቲቪቲ አይጨምሩም። ይሄ ደግሞ አንድ የኢንፍሌሽን ምንጭ ይሆናል ማለት ነው። ጀነራል ተርም ስናደርገው በዚህ መንገድ የተወያየ ነገር ካመሳፋቸው ሌሎች
Okay. Thank you very much. You have raised a very critical and important point. Let me give a chance for group 2. Group. Okay, for group 2, the Jenny.
Hello.
Hello, Dajen. Isamal.
Okay, Isamal. Okay, thank you. Our group is sort out around 5 pointers.
Okay.
One is productivity. As you know, if productivity is not increased per hectare, because the population is increasing, if the productivity increasing, not the direct relation with the increase of population, this is demand and supply is not meet. This is one point. The second one is supply chain. Supply chain in each business channel, there is a problem of supply chain is in these transportations, also the brokers. There are many channels to reach to the end product users. The second is this one. The third one is export, because in our country we just export teff and other cereals, because we are not self-sufficient. The government to get this foreign currency, this is also exported. This also makes this one shortage. The fourth one is the cultivation, the cultivated land. Nowadays, also government is putting as a policy, it's increasing to feed this the growth of population. It must increase the cultivated land. This is as a policy nowadays. They use this one. The fifth one is increasing of input price for fertilizers and others. The machineries, it is increased. This is our pointers. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much for the critical points. You have shared us very good lessons. And let me give a chance for the third group. Third group, Tarafa, okay. Okay, Tarafa, you have the chance now.
Okay, thank you, Doctor. We have discussed and point out some issues for the cause of the inflations of teff. The first, actually, all people point out our points, but if it is repeated, it maybe looks like a fact, yeah. and have to make emphasize on it. Number one, the technology or the underutilized of the land or the productivity. We didn't using the well mechanized technology in our farming, so our productivity is low, even with the land or farming land we have. So the technology is one problem, or under productivity. And the second one is the population. As we know, our Ethiopian population is second or third high population in Africa. So it is so difficult to fulfill the demand of this population. So the problem is the number of population, and the farming land is not much, or the demand and the supply is not much or balance. The other one is the what's even if we have a lot of farming land, the land is selective for the theft manufacturing or produce. Or we can't use all lands for theft, or we use the selective one. The other one is the demand of the theft in local market as well as Ethiopian diasporas in the foreign country. So the cumulative of the local demand and the diaspora is more than the supply our country is providing. The other one is the false inflation is there. It is an ethical business, or the unethical trade is there. It includes just the stock having more than what we want in stock, and the brokers and other thing is there in the for the false inflation. The other one is the even our land is become old, or we are using the fertilizer, and if we use this year TEF, second year also may we use same seed or TEF, that also may lower the productivity of our product or TEF product. Actually, on milk and the meats, there was a point there. We didn't discuss it, but I wanted to say 2 points on this about milk and meats. As we know, the grazing land is become changed into the farming land more than before. If we see the rural area, before there were a lot of forest or grazing land, and we can have a lot of cattle. Now we can't have, because of the population increase. We are using the grassland for the farming, so we can't have a lot, and we can't have a cattle for meats as well as for milk. The other thing is, the second point is about the species of our cow or types of our cow is another problem. This point I wanted to add these points. Thank you. This is the points we raised from our group. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much all for your critical points. Really, I have also learned from you, and I am happy with your reflection. Now, I hope, is it visible that I summarized on the screen? You all have reported. Okay, I think there are students as well who are raising their hand. It's time for me now. Okay, you have really observed largely the demand side as well as the supply side component of the inflation. A very critical point that you raised is the population pressure, and with the population pressure, there is no consistent increment in production. That is true, and there is lagging of production, because we are still stick to the traditional farming technique. As a result, our production is not consistent to meet with the rising population. The other component still it is valid is the export dimension, that though the domestic market is not saturated, is not satisfied, because the country has a limitation in hard currency, the government is exporting time commodities. That is true as well. But I think they have now reversed it. ጤፍን ያስቆመዋል ይመስለኛል በቆሎም ነበር anyways domestic economy satisfy ሳይሆን export ማድረግም and cause እንደሆነ identify ያደርጋቸዋል that is really valid. The other is related with input. You know that the farming for TEF requires improved seeds, fertilizer, but the price of these inputs is skyrocketing across period. Still they are imported, and this can put a pressure on the price of TEF in general. The other very critical point that's raised is this component of speculation, the one he was mentioning as false information. Though the commodity or the good is in the stock, there is a speculation that the price will increase someday. As a result, those who are in the chain of the market puts high price for the given commodity, for instance, for TEF. ምንም አይነት የምርት እጥረት ሳይኖርም ስቶክ ውስጥ አጨምር ጫውን ራሱ አርገውት ነበር የሆነ ጊዜ ካስታወሳችሁ ዋጋውን ሊጨምር ይችላል በሚል ስቶር ውስጥ ይዘጋሉ ስፔኩሌት ያደርጋሉ therefore there is a market failure ትክክለኛ የሆነ ኢንፎርሜሽን ዲሲሚኔሽን ስለማይኖር false information እየለቀቁ ሰውን በማደነባበር ሰው ተሯሯጦ ሊጠፋ ነው በሚል እንዲገዛ ያደርገዋል then ያሽሚያ ሲፈጠር ደግሞ ዋጋ ይጨምራል therefore the unhealthy marketing channel are also the cause of the inflation. And the other point that's mentioned as well is the lagged government projects. Let me tell you one history. A friend of mine is working in the construction industry, and there was a federal project under construction from village X to village Y. I don't want to mention the village. Then he is the principally responsible person working there, and that project would have to be completed within 2 years. There is a capacity, there are machineries, there are large number of labor who can work in that road project. However, they extend that project for 4 years. I asked him, why you lag it? Why you extend the project for further 2 years? He replied that if you completed within that specific period, then there will not be a means of income for our project, he said. If it is extended, the government will allocate again a budget, then they will have a portion of it, and again they will request for the next year, they will have again claim a portion of that budget for their pocket. መንገዱ የሚያልቀው በሁለት አመት ነው ግን 4 አመት አራዝመውታል ለምን ማለቅ እየቻለ በአካባቢው ብዙ ስርዓት ወጣቶች ማሽነሪውም እያለ ስራው ማለቅ እየቻለ ያቆዩበት ምክንያት ሲነግረኝ ካለቀ በጀት አይኖርም ለዛ ተብሎ በጀት ሚኖር አይኖርም ስለዚህ በየጊዜው በጀት እያስጨመሩ የፖርሽን ኦፍ ዳት እንደ means of income ይጠቀሙበታል ማለት ነው and that income is being distributed among the authorities in that village as well. Therefore lagged government projects can also result in a budget deficit, and when the government finances that budget with borrowing, for instance, it will again accelerate inflation. በአንድ ሚሊዮን በ100 ሚሊዮን ይሰራል ተብሎ 200 ሚሊዮን ከሆነ 100 ሚሊዮን unnecessary ወጪ ነው ወደ unnecessary unproductive ወደ ሆነ ኪስ ነው የሚገባው then inflation happen ያደርጋል and the one that you suggest lagged government projects is still highly valid and I acknowledge your participation. I am rushing because of time. Okay, let me reshare it. Sorry. Now let's see some case studies. Here case study actually research ናቸው empirical studies ናቸው። ይሄ የመረጥኩትም የፖሊሲ ስተዲስ ኢንስቲትዩት እና የኢፍፕሪ ኢንተርናሽናል ፉድ ፖሊሲ ሪሰርች ኢንስቲትዩት እነዚህ ተቋሞች የሰሩት ነው እና ቫሊድ ነው ማለት ነው ይሄ ፔፐር and they have conducted a research for the cause of rising cereal prices in Ethiopia, an assessment and possible controlling factors. They found that the nominal cereal prices have been increased rapidly. For instance, considering 2018 as a base year, the maize price had risen by 32%, sorghum price by 39%, teff price by 35%, wheat by 2%. And these researchers have tried to look into the possible causes for explaining these inflations. One of the fundamental reasons that causes inflation is linked to the macroeconomic factors in the economy. There is found to be a large amount of broad money supplied in the economy. And this money is transferred in the form of credit. It results in credit growth. And this credit growth has not been used for productive purposes, period. One of the possible reasons for the accelerated inflation is sourced from the money supply. The money supply. ስለዚህ ኢኮኖሚ ውስጥ ከፍተኛ የሆነ ገንዘብ ወደ ባንኮች ይለቀቃል። ባንኮች ደግሞ በብድር መልኩ ለተጠቃሚው ይለቃሉ። ያ ተጠቃሚ ወስዶ ለምርት ካላዋለበት ወይም ለማምረት ካላዋለው ያ ገንዘብ for some other consumption ውሏል ማለት ነው, which has an effect on the inflation itself. The other driving cause for the change in price is changes in inputs. For instance, labor, ይሄ የሰራተኛ ወጪ፣ የትራንስፖርት ወጪ፣ እነዚህ ይሄ የአግሪካልቸራል ኢንፑት ስትሉት የነበረው የፈርቲላይዘር እነዚህ ኢንፑት ኮስቱም አንዱ መጨመሩ ኢንፍሌሽን ሀፕን እንዲያደርግ ያደርጋል። the other is seasonality. በሃርቨስቲንግ ሲዝን ፕራይሱ ይቀንሳል። then ከዛ ውጭ ባሉት ፔሪዮዶች ፕራይሱ ኢንክሪዝ እንዲያደርግ ያደርጋል። therefore the other is seasonality, this nature of seasonality of production in the country. The other is shortfalls in supply and breakdowns in markets. This is related with the poor functioning, unhealthy functioning of the marketing channel. There is a shortfall in the supply of the commodities as well. It might be produced somewhere in rural villages. It might not be properly channeled to consumers for urban areas, for instance. And there is a breakdown in markets as well. ቀደም ስትሉ የነበራችሁትን በዳታ ተደግፈው አስቀምጠውታል። ምርት ጨምሯል ይባላል በሀገሪቱ አይደል? There is substantial evidence that production has been increasing. However, ምርትና ምርታማነት ማለት ይለያያል። ምን ማለት ነው? አንድ ሄክ with reference to inputs consider መደረግ አለበት። እነሱ ምንድነው ያደረጉት? የተመረተው ምርት አለ፣ የታረሰው የቦታ ስፋት አለ፣ የማሳው ስፋት ማለት ነው። yield, they consider yield, output per the plow line, and it shows, you see this linear line, You see this linear line? Even the area of land the area of land being plowed has consistently declined. You see this green line. As well as in the same fashion, the yield, meaning the amount of output per land, has also continuously declined. Therefore, በመጠን ስታዩት ያደገ ሊመስላል ግን per input consider ሲደረግ has not increased. Therefore, agricultural growth, the growth has been slowing by the linear trend as shown by these lines. And in the same fashion, there is accelerated population growth in the country. The other justifying reason is there is a national household consumption and expenditure survey. ይሄ በCSA አገር አቀፍ የሆኑ ኢንዲኬተሮች ኢኮኖሚው በምን ያህል ያደገ ነው የሚለውን ከማወቅ ጀምሮ ግሮዝ ኢንዲኬተርስ አሉ። አንዲት እናት ምን ያክል ኪሎ ሜትር ሄዳ ውሃ ትቀዳለች፣ የኑትሪሽን መጠን ምን ያክል ተሻሽሏል፣ ድህነት ማለት ነው። እሱን የሚለካ አጠቃላይ household consumption and expenditure survey ይባላል። በአገሪቱ ወደ 10,000 ሳምፕል ተወስዶ የሚሰበሰብ ማለት ነው። እና ያ ዳታ ምንድነው የሚያሳየው? በአጠቃላይ በአገሪቱ ሪሌቲቭሊ ድህነት ቀንሷል ነው። ድህነት ቀንሷል ማለት there is the implication of growth in income. As a result, there is the food consumption increment. And this food consumption increment is largely for those high value crops such as meat, fruits, and vegetables. And these are still the components of the goods and services, basket of goods and services, which are considered under the inflation survey. Therefore, this can also justify the possible reason for the increment in price, for the rising in price. ስለዚህ ኢንካም ሲጨምር ኮንሳምፕሽኑ በተለይም በሃይ ቫልዩ በሆኑ ክሮፖች እንደ ዳሪ፣ እንደ ሚት፣ ፍራፍሬ፣ ቬጂቴብልስ ላይ ኮንሳምፕሽኑ በጣም ይጨምራል። ስለዚህ በተመሳሳይ መልኩ ሳፕላዩ ካልጨመረ የነዚህ ሳፕላይ ካልጨመረ ኢንፍሌሽን happen ያደርጋል ማለት ነው። because from the demand side there is an increment in income. The other is speculation and market power. There is speculation, the one that you have been mentioning. However, these researchers had tried to consider whether there exists a monopoly or oligopoly power in the distribution. And they find out that there is no monopoly power or oligopoly power in the distribution of these cereals, because those farmers have the chance to connect with different channels of wholesalers. However, just consider this statement. There are unsyndicate reports from the cereal wholesale markets. ይሄ ምንድነው? ከጅምላ ሻጮቹ በተለይ የሚመጣ ኢንፎርሜሽን ይሄ ህጋዊ የሆነ አንኢቲካል የሆነ reports have also resulted in the inflation itself. This is a research finding from those institutions. The other cause of inflation as well, this is related with the structure, the market breakdowns due to unrest in the country. በተለያዩ ቦታዎች ላይ በሀገራችን ያሉ አለመረጋጋቶች አንደኛ አዳዲስ የገበያ ማዕከሎች እንዳይፈጠሩ አድርጓል። ሁለተኛ ከነዛ ገበያ ማዕከሎች ወደ ሴንተር ወይም for the periphery goods and services move እንዳያደርጉ አድርጓል ማለት ነው። And their finding tells us that there are no growing of marketing merges in the recent periods because of the problems in the country which affect the marketing flow. Therefore, unrest in the economy in the country can also result in inflationary pressure. ምንም እንኳን ምርት ቢኖር የማርኬቲንግ ቻናሉ ወደ ኮንሱመሩ ሙቭ ማድረግ ካልቻለ ኢንፍሌሽን ሀፕን ሊያደርግ ይችላል ማለት ነው። Okay. I think this is enough for today. There is also another example. We can see this in the coming class. The econometric model. Indeed, macro factors እንዴት ኢንፍሌሽንን ዲተርሚን ሊያደርጉ እንደሚችሉ በሪሰርችም አለ። እሱንም እናያለን። ረዘም ስለሚል እሱን አሁን አያልቅም በ15 ደቂቃ ውስጥ። Okay, question. Someone is asking question. I will give you a chance. Simply raise your hand. Okay, Tarafa, I have given you. Then Deraje, then Dress.
Okay, አመሰግናለሁ ዶክተር። I have some question on the research report that is shown in diagram form. It looks like an logical for me because it said that the flow of the land is decreasing and the productivity is decreasing. This one, yeah. From 2005 to 2019, the flow of the land is decreasing as well as the yield is decreasing. I have no question on the yield part, but on the area of land which is flowed. We know that before previously there is a lot of the grassland as well as forests in our country. Now it is disforested for the farming purpose everywhere. I don't know from where this data, even this researcher gets this data. For me it is unlogical, and I want to the idea from you and even the class, you say something on this one. Is it logical or not? This is my question. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much for your critical view. You see, the authors have also indicated this whole. They have made their calculation. Unmute Argaskaza.
Okay.
Unmute Argamat. Okay, thank you very much. The first point is this is a research report, and they have clearly indicated the source. They have taken the data from the central statistical authorities, from government. One answer. The other point is it doesn't indicate the entire crops, okay? The sample is taken for selected or few crops. ለምሳሌ ሁሉንም ክሮፖች አይደለም የወሰደው፣ ሜይዝን፣ ሰርገም፣ ጤፍ ነው የወሰደው። Therefore, this decreasing trend for the production, not production, the growth, the agricultural growth for those specific crops is referring for selected crops. ለሁሉም አይደለም የሁሉም ያገሪቱ ከሆነ ሌላ ሪፖርት ሊሆን ይችላል ምናልባትም ላይኑ ወደ ላይ ሊሄድ ይችላል ይሄ ኮንሲደር ያደረገው for selected grains or crops therefore their scope doesn't cover all ስለዚህ ምናልባትም ለሌሎች ክሮፕ ይሄ ወደ በረሃውን የሰሊጥ ወይም የሌላ በቆሎ የምናምን ጨምሮ ሊሆን ይችላል but their sample is framed with very few crops that is why this line might be declining however as to my information and I have seen from the former Ministry of Finance and Economic Development report GTP 2 or and it shows that there is a consistent increment in the total agricultural land in the country that is also proved using GIS application applied softwares but GIS ሁሉ አሳይተውታል ስለዚህ this is taken for few crops okay ደጀኔ ተረፈ ካልተመለሰልህ ተመልሰህ መግባት ትችላለህ
እሺ የኔ ጥያቄ አሁን ምንድነው አሁን የተረፈን እኔም ሼር አረጋለሁ ግን አሁን የተመለሰልኝ ይመስለኛል ምክንያቱም ይሄ ሰሌክትድ የሆኑ የግሬን እንትን ስለሆነ ሌሎቹ ኦሬዲ ጨምረው እነዚህ ቀንሰው ሰብስቲት ያደረጉት ሊሆን ይችላልና እኔም አንድ ጥያቄ ምንድነው አንድ እንዴት ኔጌቲቭ ሊሆን ይችላል የሚለው ነው የኔ ጥያቄ ወይስ የሆነ እንደ ቤዝ የተወሰደ አለ ማለት ነው እዚህ ላይ ያልተገለጸ ፊገር እንደ ቤዝ አሁን ኔጌቲቭ አሳይቷልና ኔጌቲቭ ሊሆን የሚችለው የሚለው ነው
ገብቶኛል ግሮዝ ነው ግሮዝ ስለሆነ ለምሳሌ 2014 ላይ 10 ቶን እንበል አመረተ እንበል ከዛ 2015 ላይ 9 ከሆነ ግሮዙ ኔጌቲቭ ነው የሚሆነው ለዛ ነው ለምን ስትቀንሰው ኔጌቲቭ ይመጣል ማለት ነው ግሮዝ ነው የሚያሳየው የአክቹዋል አውትፑት ኔጌቲቭ አይሆንም
እሺ እሺ ታንክ
ሌላ ደጀኔን አሁን እድል ሰጠው ማን ነው ሌላ okay thank you for much for the dress okay I was just closing okay
እሺ የመጀመሪያው ጥያቄ ኢንፍሌሽን ኮዝ ያላቸው ማለት ነው እነዚህ ላይ ያለው ነገር ማለት ነው አይሰማም
አሁን ይሰማል
ኮዝ ኢንፍሌሽን ላይ ሶስቶቹ ዲማንድ ፑል ኮስት ፑሽ እና መኒ ሰፕላይ ላይ ማለት ነው ይሰማል አንደኛው
ስፒኪንግ
ለሀገራችን ኬዝ አንድ ጠቅለል አድርገን መግለጽ እንችላለን አሁን የሀገራችን ኢንፍሌሽን ኮዙ ዲማንድ ፑል ነው ብለን ጀነራላይዝ ማድረግ እንችላለን ወይስ እንዴት ነው የመጀመሪያው ጥያቄ ማለት ነው
አንችልም ነው መልሱ
ሁለተኛ
ኮዞቹ ብዙ ናቸው
እሺ ሁለተኛው ጥያቄ ነው
ምክንያቱም አሁን አንድ
እሺ
በዲማንድ በኩልም አለ በሳፕላይ መልኩም አለ አሁን ብዙ ሪሰርቾችን ዳውንሎድ አድርጋችሁ እዩ የመኒ ሳፕላይ ኤክስፓንሽኑ በኢኮኖሚው ኢንፍሌሽን ሃፕን እንዲያደርግ አድርጓል ሚል በጣም ብዙ ኤቪደንሶች አሉ ሪሰርችም ነገ አሳያችኋለሁ በኢኮኖሜትሪክስ ሞዴሉ እንዴት ስፔሲፋይ እንዳደረጉት ምን ውጤት እንዳገኙ ማለት ነው እሱንም እና በስትራክቸራል ሪጂዲቲዎችም አሉ ከሳፕላዩን ከማቅረብ የኢንፎርሜሽን ፕሮብለም ስለዚህ የታዳጊ ሀገሮች ኮዝ ኦፍ ኢንፍሌሽን በጣም መልቲ ዲሲፕሊን መልቲ ዳይሜንሽናል ነው ኢኮኖሚው በራሱ ግሮዝ ኢንካም ግሮዝ ሲያደርግ ራሱ የሚፈጥረው ናቹራል የሆነ ኢንፍሌሽን ራሱ አለ ስለዚህ ከብዙ አንፃር ነው የኛ ኢንፍሌሽን የሚገለጸው
ልዩነት መፍጠር ዓላማችን ነው ዓለም አቀፍ ተወዳዳሪ መሆን አለባችሁ የናሽናል ኤርዌይስ እህት ኩባንያ ናሽናል አቪዬሽን ኮሌጅ ጥራትና ደረጃውን የጠበቀ ስልጠና በመስጠት ብቁ ዜጋ ያፈራን ነው በፍላይት ኦፕሬሽን በበረራ መስተንግዶ በቲኬቲንግና ሪዘርቬሽን በሆቴልና ቱሪዝም ሙያዎች አሰልጥነን ተወዳዳሪ እናደርጉታለን ኮሌጃችን ካናዳ ከሚገኘው ኢንተርናሽናል ኤር ትራንስፖርት አሶሲዬሽን አያታና ከእንግሊዙ ICM ጋር በመተባበር ዓለም አቀፍ ዕውቅና ያለው ስልጠና እየሰጠ ይገኛል በፍላይት ኦፕሬሽን በበረራ መስተንግዶ የምንሰጣቸው ስልጠና ከኢትዮጵያ ሲቪል አቪዬሽን ባለስልጣን ሙሉ ዕውቅና አለው አድራሻ ከጎላጉል ታወር 22 አደባባይ ወደ ሾላ በሚወስደው መንገድ ላይ የናሽናል ኤርዌይስ እህት ኩባንያ ናሽናል አቪዬሽን ኮሌጅ ህልሞን እውን ያደርጋል